Welcome to the deep dive. We have a really fascinating journey ahead of us today. We are pulling from this incredible historical manuscript.
Yeah, it is a brilliant piece of work.
It really is. It's titled Croatians on Vancouver Island, Echoes from the Past by Ilimir B. Juricic. And our mission for this deep dive is to trace the globe-spanning, honestly highly improbable journey of a single 19th century immigrant.
Right, a man named Amun Girardi.
Exactly. Who later became known as Sam Juricic. And through his life, we're going to see how massive global technological shifts, indigenous traditions, and completely arbitrary colonial laws literally shaped the modern Pacific Northwest.
It's basically a microcosm of the entire era packed into one guy's life.
Right. So let's start with a little mental exercise for you. Imagine you're standing in the picturesque maritime town of Gig Harbor, Washington.
Beautiful place.
Oh, gorgeous. You're looking out at the water, maybe watching the boats bobbing at the docks. And right there, at the entrance to a small park, there's a stone monument.
Yeah, the one commemorating the first white settlers of the town.
Yep. 3 men who arrived in a flat-bottom rowboat in the dead of winter in 1867. Now, on the surface, it sounds like your standard local pioneer story, right? Just a few guys rowing into a harbor to start a town.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this, because how those men actually ended up in that rowboat is a wild, epic saga that starts, well, half a world away.
What's fascinating here is that Sam's story serves as a brilliant masterclass in human adaptation. We often think of history as just a series of dates or famous leaders, right?
Oh, absolutely.
But looking at his life reveals how macro-level global events, like, say, the invention of a new engine, a sudden shift in international borders, or just the stroke of a bureaucrat's pen, how those things force everyday people to completely dismantle and reinvent their reality just to survive.
And Sam's reality started in a place that looks like a literal paradise.
Yeah.
He was born in 1833 in the Bay of Kotor.
Which is stunning.
Right, looking at a modern map, this is right near the border of Montenegro and Croatia. It's this deep inlet of the Adriatic Sea, pressed right up against these dramatic, completely barren limestone mountains.
It's an amazing geography, but it was also a massive powerhouse of maritime culture. I mean, the people there, the Dalmatians, have this profound, multi-generational connection to the sea.
Yeah.
They actually proudly referred to themselves as the Agravenuti, or the Argonauts.
Mm-hmm.
They operated an elite maritime guild called the Boca Brotherhood of Seamen, and that was founded all the way back in the year 809.
Wait, the year 809?
Yeah, over 1,000 years before Sam was even born.
Wow. That is centuries of elite seafaring heritage.
Exactly. And by the late 1700s, their majestic wooden windjammers were sailing every known sea.
But there's a major catch with Sam, right? While he grew up in this elite, highly technical maritime environment, his family actually originated from a region called Lika, which is this area up in the rugged mountains behind the coast. And the people of Lika were known as tough, courageous frontiersmen. But they carried one major disadvantage into the 19th century.
A huge disadvantage.
Yeah, Sam, like many from his region, was completely illiterate. He couldn't read or write a single letter.
Which becomes the defining constraint of his entire life later on. I mean, in his early years, raw physical strength and seafaring skill, that was enough to make a living. But you don't leave a beautiful coastal home unless you are pushed out.
Like?
And the Dalmatians in the mid-19th century were facing this devastating wave of push factors that systematically dismantled their economy.
Because the biggest disruption was the steamship.
Oh, for sure.
Invented in 1807, steam-powered vessels slowly but surely started to just dominate the global oceans.
The mechanism behind this takeover really comes down to predictability. The Dalmatian sailors were absolute masters of the windjammer, but a windjammer relies entirely on the weather.
Yeah, you're at the mercy of the wind.
Exactly. A voyage could take 3 weeks or it could take 3 months. Steamships, on the other hand, offered scheduled, predictable freight. They could navigate against currents. They didn't have to wait for trade winds. Almost overnight, the premium freight market just abandoned sail for steam.
It's almost like being a highly specialized software engineer, or like a commercial artist today, right?
Yeah.
And suddenly an AI drops that does your exact job faster, cheaper, and without needing sleep.
That is a perfect analogy.
Your primary trade is instantly obsolete. So if he couldn't read or write to retrain for a new profession, how did he survive in a brand new world where his skills were useless?
Well, he was trapped. And to make matters worse, Mother Nature piled on at the exact same time.
Right, the bugs.
Yeah, a plague of grape phylloxera. These are tiny insects that eat the roots of grapevines. They completely devastated the Dalmatian vineyards, which wiped out their second major industry.
Just a total economic collapse.
And whatever wine they did manage to produce was immediately undercut by Italian merchants. They deliberately dumped cheap wine into the market just to crash the prices.
Wow.
Combine that with a chronic lack of drinkable water in the region, and people were quite literally facing starvation. Harbors in the Bay of Kotor were abandoned. Master captains were reduced to poverty.
So because he couldn't fall back on reading or writing, Sam had to rely entirely on his physical endurance. He had to go where the raw physical labor was.
Which in the 1850s meant finding passage to the Americas.
Right. He secured work on an Austrian ship plying the waters from Europe to New York, and eventually he set his sights on California.
But getting to California from New York in the 1850s, that meant sailing all the way around Cape Horn, down at the violent southern tip of South America.
Oh, man. I really picture the reality of this voyage. I mean, you're subsisting on meager rations of salted meat that is practically wood, worm-infested biscuits, and just stagnant water stored in these wooden casks.
The physical danger was absolutely relentless. Approaching the Horn, ships routinely encountered 80 to 90-foot rogue waves. Hurricane force, freezing winds.
That's terrifying.
Men had to climb the rigging to trim sails while completely coated in ice, knowing that just one slip meant being swallowed by the ocean.
Yeah, and when they weren't fighting for their lives in a gale, they were trapped in the doldrums, just battling mind-numbing boredom for weeks on end with absolutely nothing to do.
But they endured it because of the Golden Whisper, right? California. The 1848 gold rush had completely rewired the global economy. By the time Sam arrived, California was swarming with fortune seekers. The Dalmatians even called it Zlatna California, Golden California.
Yeah, and a thriving community of Dalmatians had already set up in San Francisco.
Yeah.
They found the climate and the olive trees incredibly similar to the Adriatic coast.
But Sam kept moving.
He did, because in 1858, news broke of a massive new gold strike up north on the Fraser River in British Columbia. Victoria, on Vancouver Island, transformed into a boon town practically overnight.
It was chaos.
Total chaos. So Sam heads north. And here's where it gets really interesting. You'd expect him to, grab a pickaxe, hike into the mountains, and start panning for gold.
Right, like everyone else.
Exactly. But he doesn't. He teams up with two other men, a fellow Croatian named Peter Goldsmith and a Portuguese man named John Farragut. And they decide the real wealth isn't in the dirt at all. It's in the water.
It's the classic economic pivot. They recognized that tens of thousands of gold miners flooding into the region didn't just need gold. I mean, they needed to eat, and they needed industrial supplies.
So Sam and his partners pooled their resources and bought a long, flat-bottomed skiff built of heavy cedar boards.
No sails, no motor.
None of that. They used pure muscle power, rowing this massive boat with 16-foot oars through the freezing waters of the Strait of Georgia.
Unbelievable stamina.
So he started catching salmon, right? Selling it in bulk to the Hudson Bay Company. But salmon wasn't their golden goose. Their biggest moneymaker was a fish that practically everyone else considered absolute garbage.
The dogfish.
Dogfish.
Yeah, the dogfish is a small shark with no bones, just a cartilaginous skeleton. Europeans and Americans viewed it as a total nuisance that just ruined their nets.
Right.
Its skin is so rough, it's like rubberized sandpaper. The native peoples of the Pacific Northwest actually peeled it off, dried it, and used it to sand down their intricate woodwork.
Wait, hold on. You're telling me the legendary Golden California and Fraser River gold rushes were actually fueled by guys selling shark liver grease?
That is the hidden engine of the gold rush, yeah.
Hmm?
Sam and his partners weren't after the meat or the skin. Dogfish have these disproportionately massive livers that are incredibly rich in oil.
Okay.
And this specific oil had a chemical property that was essentially magic for the 19th century industrial boom.
Which was?
It didn't oxidize.
Meaning it didn't become sticky or rancid over time like vegetable oils do?
Exactly. It stayed incredibly slick under immense friction.
Right.
The booming logging industry in the Pacific Northwest, they relied entirely on dogfish oil to grease the massive wooden skids they used to slide giant Douglas fir logs out of the deep woods.
Oh.
Yeah, without that slick oil, moving timber of that size was nearly impossible.
And the miners used it too, because before modern safety lamps were introduced, coal miners wore these tiny lamps on their heads that looked like miniature coffee pots with a burning wick sticking right out of the spout.
Yep.
And they fueled those headlamps deep underground with dogfish oil.
Yeah.
Because it burned brightly and consistently.
So Sam and his partners are literally fueling the industrial expansion of the Pacific Northwest.
That's wild.
And the mechanics of their business were brutal but highly profitable. They built a rendering plant on the shore. This meant catching thousands of these small sharks, cutting out the massive livers, and tossing them into enormous iron cauldrons of boiling water over open fires.
Sounds awful.
Oh, the smell must have been incredible. The heat bursts the cell walls of the liver, the pure oil floats to the top of the vat, and they would manually skim it off and seal it in wooden barrels for sale.
Wow, it's the ultimate cell shovels during a gold rush scenario. Except, the shovels are barrels of boiled shark oil. And this massive trading operation meant Sam was constantly navigating the waters of the Puget Sound and the Gulf Islands, which naturally brought him into daily, deep contact with the native populations.
Right.
Specifically, his trading routes made him a frequent visitor to Cooper Island.
And Cooper Island was the home of several bands of the Coast Salish peoples, primarily the Penelakut Band. To understand this era, we really have to look at what these communities had just endured.
It was devastating.
They had been tragically decimated by diseases brought by early European contact. Smallpox had swept through the region, dropping the Coast Salish population from around 12,000 in the 1830s to just over 5,500.
But despite that devastation, the society on Cooper Island remained incredibly complex and deeply rooted in the environment. Their entire civilization operated on the Cowichan calendar, which was broken into 13 moons.
Right, and living by 13 moons meant their society was highly organized around seasonal migration and harvesting.
It wasn't just random foraging.
Not at all. Entire villages would mobilize based on the moon. There was a specific moon for the salmon running, a moon for moving to the clam beds, and a moon for harvesting berries. And then the long, dark winter months, those were dedicated to potlatches.
These potlatches were massive, highly structured gatherings. They involved intense trading, political negotiations, feasting, and the redistribution of wealth.
Yeah.
And because Sam was a reliable trader who treated the community with respect, he integrated himself into this seasonal rhythm.
He did.
And this mutual respect culminated in his marriage to a Coast Salish woman named Anna, whose native name was Henemat.
Anna belonged to the Yekaloas band, and her family was actually part of the Coast Salish aristocracy.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, their society was highly stratified into an upper class, a lower class, and slaves. The upper class families controlled wealth, specific resource territories, and very powerful hereditary names.
Right, so as a noblewoman, Anna was meticulously raised according to strict upper class customs. She received intensive training in preserving food and weaving, but the core of her education was moral.
Exactly.
Aristocratic girls were drilled constantly on behavior, like don't lie, don't steal, be generous, show deep respect to your elders.
And Sam, this illiterate Dalmatian fisherman who had survived Cape Horn, fell in love with her.
Yeah.
They decided to marry around 1866. But because she was highborn, Sam couldn't just, ask her father for her hand. The marriage mechanics required him to publicly prove his worth to the entire village.
I love this detail. The suitor had to gather an immense amount of wealth and physically pile presents outside the door of the girl's longhouse.
Just massive pile.
Yeah, he had to stand out there, sometimes for days, while the gifts just kept piling up higher and higher until the family finally deemed the display of wealth and respect sufficient to give their answer.
It's amazing. If we connect this to the bigger picture, it completely shatters the stereotypical Hollywood narrative of the pioneer West.
Oh, entirely.
Here we have a seamless blending of two vastly different worlds. An illiterate Croatian sailor and a highly educated, the traditional Coast Salish sense noblewoman. They forged a bond over their shared understanding of the sea, grueling physical work, and the universal language of trade.
They built a real life together. They had a daughter, Caroline. They lived in a cabin, rendered their dogfish oil, and thrived in this vibrant cross-cultural space on the islands.
It was a good life.
It was. But then politics entered the chat.
Ah, right.
A distant, bureaucratic event fundamentally destroyed the foundation of their entire life.
On July 1st, 1867, the Dominion of Canada is officially formed. Yeah. Distant provinces out east unite into a new nation, and Ottawa immediately starts trying to consolidate Western territories like British Columbia under federal control.
And with the new nation comes a sweeping tidal wave of new legislation.
Always.
Two specific laws hit Sam and Anna at the exact same time, and the intersection of these laws formed a trap they couldn't escape. First was the Indian Act.
Right. The mechanism of the Indian Act was basically designed for assimilation. And it targeted Native women specifically.
Which is so cruel.
It really was. Under this new legislation, an Indian woman who married anyone other than a legally recognized Indian immediately ceased to be Indian under the law.
Meaning, by the simple act of marrying Sam, the federal government suddenly classified Anna as legally white.
And the consequences were immediate and severe. From that day forward, she was legally stripped of her membership in her tribe. She lost the right to inherit her family's property.
Yeah.
She was legally barred from living on her own ancestral reserve with her husband and child. The stroke of a pen in Ottawa literally legislated away her home.
Just wiped it out.
Yeah.
And as if evicting his wife wasn't enough, the government concurrently destroyed Sam's ability to make a living.
Because of the fishing regulations.
Right. New commercial fishing regulations dictated that you could only take fish for trade and commerce if you were a recognized citizen holding an oath of allegiance. And to get that citizenship under the Naturalization Act, you had to pass a specific requirement. The applicant had to possess an adequate knowledge of either English or French to read the information material supplied to candidates.
To read it.
Yep.
Sam could speak multiple languages through trade, but he couldn't read or write a single word in Croatian, English, or French.
He was completely cornered by the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
He couldn't legally fish and render oil without citizenship. He couldn't get citizenship because of the literacy test. And his wife had just been legally evicted from her tribal lands because she married him.
So what does this all mean? The irony is almost unbelievable. Sam Jerisic survived the brutal 17,000-mile voyage around Cape Horn.
Right.
He endured rogue waves, starvation, the grueling labor of rowing a massive wooden skiff through freezing winter storms. He built a highly profitable industrial supply business out of a nuisance shark nobody else wanted.
He thrived.
He thrived in a rugged wilderness and successfully navigated a complex cultural merger. But he's ultimately defeated by paperwork and a spelling test.
It's tragic. The macro-level events we talked about at the beginning, the formation of a new government thousands of miles away, just swept away his entire reality in an instant.
Yeah.
With Anna disenfranchised and his livelihood criminalized, they had absolutely no choice but to flee.
And they made a dramatic escape. In the dead of winter, late 1867, during a massive gale, Sam, Anna, their baby daughter, and his two fishing partners packed whatever they could fit into that flat-bottomed skiff.
Back into the rowboat.
Back into the rowboat. They rowed south, fleeing British Columbia and crossing the watery border into United States territory. And trying to find shelter from the freezing storm, they navigated into Puget Sound and slipped into a small, calm bay. Gig Harbor.
They stepped out of that rowboat and became the first white settlers of Gig Harbor. They built a one-room, split-seater cabin on the shore. And true to the adaptability he showed his entire life, Sam just started over.
He really did. He expanded his business from scratch. He built a new dock, a brand new rendering plant for dogfish oil, a smokehouse, a warehouse.
And Anna utilized her Coast Salish training to knit heavy fishing nets, forage for seasonal foods, and run the household. They went on to have 5 children together, and they prospered.
They did. But the most touching detail, I think, is that Sam, the man who was exiled and stripped of his livelihood because he couldn't read, instilled a fierce, unyielding love of education in every single one of his children.
That makes perfect sense.
He made absolutely sure they acquired the skills that had been weaponized against him.
He died in Gig Harbor in 1905 at the age of 72, having lived a remarkably full life.
Yeah.
Anna lived until 1926. And today, the monument in Jerris Beach Park stands right there on the water in memory of that resilient Dalmatian fisherman and the diverse family he built.
It's an incredible legacy. But before we wrap up this deep dive, there is one final, almost bizarre detail from the source material that builds on this whole story, and it's about his name.
Oh, the name changes.
Yes, we've been calling him Sam Jerisic, but as we mentioned early on, he was born in Munjaricic.
Right, and the Americanization of immigrant names is a massive, often overlooked mechanism of this era's history. The Croatian language relies heavily on diacritical marks.
Those are the little accents over the letters, right?
Exactly. They completely change the pronunciation. A C with a mark sounds like a she. An E's with a mark sounds like a sh.
But 19th century payroll clerks, border agents, and census takers in North America, they didn't know how to read those marks.
And frankly, they didn't care to learn.
Nope. The officials often just guessed how to spell names based on how they sounded to an English speaker's ear. Or, out of pure impatience, they would arbitrarily translate a name to make it easier for their ledgers.
Like his partner.
Yes. A Croatian man named Zlataric, because Zlato means gold in his native language, was just impatiently written down as Goldsmith.
And the bureaucracy struck Sam's identity, too. The 1880 census lists his family under the spelling Adriatic, but in official land deeds, some clerk wildly misinterpreted his name and recorded him as Serario Uraish.
Serario Uraish, that's not even close.
Not even close. 2 years before he died, Sam actually had to go to a notary and record a public affidavit physically signing the legal document with the mark of an X because he still couldn't write.
Right.
Just to legally prove to the government that Samuel Adriatic and Serario Uraish were, in fact, the exact same human being.
That is just wild.
Yeah.
And it leaves you with something really interesting to ponder. Think about your own family tree, or the names of the historical streets and the old towns around where you live.
Yeah.
How much of our documented official history is actually just a 19th century clerk's spelling mistake? How many epic globe-spanning stories of people surviving 17,000-mile ocean voyages, boiling shark livers to fuel a gold rush, and navigating the complex collision of ancient cultures? How many of those are hiding right now behind a misspelled name on a faded census form, just waiting to be uncovered?